Hello, and welcome to this edition of Cloud Marathon Lunch and Learn. In this session, I'm going to be providing you an introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics. I've seen a number of Azure Synapse Analytics presentations on the web, and as I don't want to duplicate any of the other content which is out there, I'm not going to show you how to create an Azure Synapse Workspace. But what I am going to do is provide you the information which, after working with the product, I think would be the most valuable. I want to show you what you can do with Azure Synapse and provide some use cases for using the different features which it contains. My name is Ginger Grant, and I am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. Back when people traveled, I did travel all over the world to talk about different aspects of data. I am often on Twitter, so that's a great place to get a hold of me at DesertIsleSQL, and check out my blog at www.desertisleSQL.com. Today we're going to be talking about the portions of Azure Synapse Analytics that I think are going to be most helpful in helping you to learn all about the product. The first thing that we are going to discuss are pools. There are 4 different pools that you can use in Azure Synapse Analytics, and which one you wish to use depends on what you want to do with Azure Synapse. And that's why we're going to discuss the use cases. What are good reasons to use Azure Synapse? What can you do with it? When should you use which pool? We'll cover all of that so you have a good baseline understanding of how the technology works and how and why you'd want to apply it in your environment. We'll also talk about how it integrates with other applications and how you can use it to create pipelines or visualize your data. Now, there are 4 different pools that are available in Azure Synapse Analytics for you to do work with. Now, Azure Synapse is like a number of Microsoft's newer products where the compute is separate from the code environment. And each of these 4 elements represents a different compute or a different server area where you are going to be working for specific tasks. The first is the dedicated pool. This is the version that most people think of when they think of Azure Synapse, because the dedicated pool is the successor to an Azure SQL database. The serverless pool is used to create virtual databases, and these virtual databases can come from, say, Cosmos DB, or more commonly come from taking data that is stored in an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 in a structured columnar format and turning those into a virtual database, allowing you to write T-SQL queries against flat files. The third pool is a Spark pool. Spark is used in a number of different compute processes. Generally speaking, it's commonly used for tasks like writing ETL or creating machine learning elements that you can use to analyze your data a little bit more thoroughly. The fourth pool is the integration runtime. Azure Synapse Analytics incorporates Azure Data Factory components. As a matter of fact, the code base is very, very similar. There are just a few differences that I will discuss a little bit further. Dedicated pools are the successor to Azure SQL DW, the data warehousing component in Azure. These pools are created by you, and you can determine how big you want these pools to be. Now, pools are separate from the data itself and the logic itself, which gives you the ability to stop your dedicated pool whenever you wish, restart it, the data is still there. This is important because with dedicated pools, you are charged for every minute that the pool is in operation. But since the code is separate from the data, you also have the ability to change the pool whenever you need it. For example, let's say for month end, you need more compute. No problem. You can create a larger pool and run your data warehouse on that. Don't need that kind of compute? Change it to a smaller pool, which will run more economically. Now, the data warehousing component in dedicated pools is really designed for very large databases, 1 terabyte or more. So if you don't have at least that kind of data, this probably isn't the best tool for you. But if you do have large data, it's optimized to handle those data loads very quickly. And there are a number of tools that were added when it became part of Synapse to improve the performance and allow you to target compute towards tasks or users. Serverless pools are created when you create your Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. It's included as part of the overall creation of the workspace. You are only charged with this pool for when you use it. So if you're not using it, it doesn't cost you anything. When you do use it, you are charged on a usage basis. So it's $5 a terabyte for every query that you run against it. Now this is designed to work with Azure Data Lake Gen 2. As a matter of fact, when you create your Azure Synapse Analytics workspace, you do have to specify a Azure Data Lake Gen 2 service to use with the account. Now you could use other ones, but you at least have to have one. And this pool allows you to create virtual tables and virtual databases on top of these pools. It uses actual T-SQL, not T-SQLite, so you can use any commands that you wish to be able to create databases on top of flat files. Now, will it perform as well as a SQL database? No, it won't, because you're querying against flat files. But I think you'll really be impressed with the performance that it does provide, considering that you are using it to query actual flat file data. The next pool that we're going to be talking about in Azure Synapse is the Apache Spark pool. This is the area where you might choose to write ETL or machine learning components, which you can use in a pipeline or to create objects to run in a Synapse environment. Now you can write either Python, .NET, or Scala versions, and it's based totally on notebooks. If you are familiar with Databricks, you are familiar with the concepts around Apache Spark, but it's not the same, so there's not a one-to-one code conversion. It is expecting that you have some familiarity of the Apache Spark libraries to be able to optimally write code in Apache Spark that will run efficiently. The Apache Spark cluster will allow you to configure more resources when you wish it to go faster, and again, the code is separate, so the pool will automatically turn off when not in use. By default, that's 15 minutes, but you can make it happen more quickly. Because it has to start up before you're ready to use it, it does take about 4 minutes for it to get going. The integration runtime that it creates is called Auto-Resolve Integration Runtime, and should you wish to have more compute for your integration tasks, you can create additional ones which contain more resources, allowing your code to run more quickly. Like the other elements, code is separate from the compute, so you can choose to run your code on a faster integration runtime if you choose to create one. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into the demos is the integration between Azure Synapse and Power BI. You can use Power BI to query the data that you have within your data lake, to examine what you have there, or to perhaps create reports to better illustrate the contents of your data. You can do this with data that perhaps is landed there through an integration service, or perhaps more curated data and that you are going to use for Power BI reporting. You do this by connecting Azure Synapse to one Power BI workspace. You can examine the data from within Power BI inside of Azure Synapse. Enough talking. Let's take a look at the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace so we can see what it can do. So here, within the Azure portal, I've created a Synapse workspace. Now within my Synapse workspace, we can see that I have my built-in pool. This is the former name of the SQL Serverless Pools. If you look at older documentation, you will see it called built-in pools. So remember that when you're doing searches. I also have two dedicated pools. These pools I'm using for data warehousing. The sizes are different, which allows me to use more or less resources depending upon the tasks that I wish to create. Now, while the serverless pool was created automatically when I created the workspace, these two pools were created by me. Now, the built-in pool is running, these pools are not. So if we take a look at them, we can see that they are paused. And that's on purpose to conserve Azure resources. I also have created a Spark pool. This Spark pool is a medium pool, and I've created it to do machine learning tasks. Now let's take a look at Synapse Studio. This is where you're going to be doing most of the work within Azure Synapse. I've got a number of resources in here that I want to show you. When you first enter into it, you'll be landed at the home page. One thing that I really want to encourage you to do is take a look at the Learn section. If you're new to Azure Synapse, this shows you a great place to get started to use samples immediately so that you can be hands-on in your learning of Azure Synapse. Let's take a look at the rest of my resources here. You see, these are some of the elements that I've recently looked at. Let's take a look at my data. Now within my data, I have my pools created. I also have created a logical demo with Spark using a connection to Cosmos DB and one to Spark itself. Now under my link section, these are the links that I have to different resources. You see that I have connections here to several different Azure Data Lake storages. Again, this is my primary. These are my secondary. So from within my storage accounts here, I can take a look at my data and take a look at the data that I've got within it and query it within Azure Synapse. So let's take a look at my curated section here. And I've got some AdventureWorks data here, and I've got it in several different formats. Now, when you have data in a data lake and you're querying within Synapse, the most efficient format to use is a Parquet format. This format allows for data compression at the columnar level, which also means that it's cheaper to store. It's not human readable, but it's very fast to query. So let's go ahead and query this data, and I'm going to right click on it and just create a select top 100 rows to allow me to take a look at my data. It shows me the properties, which I can turn off with this button up here. It is writing the code for me. I just need to select run. So it's going to retrieve the top 100 rows within my file and show it to me as if I was doing SQL. So we see here that I've got a number of data elements here. I've got my headers, and I'm going to take a look at my data, and I can do queries on it as well. So I could do any kind of T-SQL that I wish to do in my notebook here that I'm using to query. And I've just queried a file. So this is relatively quick considering that I'm not using a database, I'm connecting to a file. Now let's take a look at some of the notebooks that I've created here in the Develop section. So one of the things that I have done is I've created a logical data warehouse on top of my data. So this creates a logical data warehouse, so any queries that I create would be in this particular database. It's kind of a neat thing to be able to do. The other thing that I can do that I've saved off of here is I can query folders with multiple files, looking at all of the files in one folder. I've gone ahead and created that. And for these particular elements, I'm getting a little bit more complex with my SQL. And I am only selecting elements that I wish to read. So here, looking at my blob storage, I've got a whole bunch of different files here that I've got aliased with a star. So I can go ahead and just select a select element of these, looking at the passenger count by year for this particular data set. A little bit more sophisticated than just selecting the first 100 rows. Now notice here that I'm connected to my built-in pool. This is my serverless pool that was automatically created when I created my Synapse Workspace. We see here that I've got a number of years, and then I have the number of rides totaled here. Taking a look at these totaled, you can see that I've got a very large number of files with a lot of data that I'm looking through to get this particular SQL element. Again, when I'm doing this, I'm running straight up T-SQL, not SQLite or anything like that. Now let's take a look at some of the notebooks that I've got created, and some of them are for different elements, including machine learning elements that I've created within Synapse. So looking here, I've created an integration with the AutoML component. Now what this is doing is this is accessing my Azure resource of Azure Machine Learning and incorporating the functionality within that product within my Synapse Workspace. So what I'm going to be able to do here is import information from my core workspace, getting the data, accessing it, and then I can access elements within it and use those resources within Azure. So not only can I connect and integrate Power BI, I can also integrate my Azure ML Workspace. Now this provides me the ability to use Automl Libraries. And when I import AutoML configuration, here what I'm using is the ability for Azure Machine Learning to go through my data set, which is a taxi data set, and determine which is the best regression algorithm to determine whether or not somebody is likely to tip. I'm not going to be doing the analysis. I'm going to let the machine learning in Azure ML perform that analysis for me. I also have the ability to just write straight up at XML by doing a simple classification library using Spark. Here I'm using a number of different libraries here and applying information on a Spark dataset to get some machine learning results. I've gone ahead and started my Spark cluster so that we can run through this machine learning solution to take a look at the kinds of analysis that you can do. One other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of integration, you'll notice here that I've got an Azure Devops icon up here in the top left-hand corner. I am fully integrated with Azure Devops. I'm using the Dev branch, and I'm going to commit my changes to my branch whenever I'm done complete with my code. So you've got full CI/CD integration as well. Briefly, let me walk through my machine learning experiment here. I have some data that I've got for customers, and I want to see how many customers responded to my marketing plan last time and how many of them are likely to do that in the future and create a new account. So here I'm taking a look at my data in my schema. and selecting them by the type of deposits that they have, the types of products that they have, to see if they've got what kind of deposit products they have. And I've got a pretty even split here. And so I'm analyzing that both in a table, and of course I can do that within a chart. And then I'm going to format my data by looking at the criteria of my customers to see what kind of customers have in different classifications of jobs, have what kind of accounts, pre-processing my data, creating data sets designed to be analyzed in machine learning, and then I'm analyzing my data to determine if I can figure out what kind of people or characteristics are likely to get a new kind of deposit account. And I can evaluate my models, look at my pipelines, and make some predictions based upon my pipelines on how good my model was able to do. And I can see how good it was and doing some predictions. Looking here, I've got an accuracy of 80%. And I got my 80% results using my logistic regression algorithm here. Let's briefly take a look at some of the other elements that I wanted to show you. Here is my integration pipelines. This is showing you the similar kind of thing as you would see within a Azure Data Factory component with sources, syncing, mapping, etc. And then I also have within my data section, naturally, I also have data warehouses created as well. Here in the workspace section, where I've got tables, external tables that I can create. And depending upon which pool I'm using, I could have data in either one of them. I'm very flexible that way. I also have the ability to manage my pools, taking a look at how they're performing, looking at my link services, and there's also an integration with Azure Purview as well, another integration that's contained within Azure Synapse. Let's take a look at how to access Power BI from within Azure Synapse. You'll notice here in the Develop section, there is a section for Power BI. Now, this is a different account than I demoed earlier because it is important that your Power BI tenant be in your same Azure tenant, which it is here. If we look at Power BI, we see that I have some Power BI data sets here, and these match the ones that exist within my Power BI workspace. My Power BI workspace is listed here, and it is listed as Power BI Account Dev. Let's take a look at the same workspace within Power BI. So here within Power BI, you'll see this is my Accounting Dev workspace, and these are my data sets that I have within it, which match the ones here within Power BI. I can open up my Power BI reports, and from here I can see the data that exists inside my data lake here within Power BI. My data lake has several data files that I'm querying here: customer, product, and sales. And I'm connected to my data lake, which I configured within Power BI, and this allows me to take a look at the number of my customers that were added and the dates at which they were added, which I've done here. This is just a simple exploration that I've done with my data to give me a better view of the data that's contained within my data lake. Let's take a look at what I need to set up within Power BI to be able to connect to my data lake. From within the admin portal, I'll need to go to Azure Connections and make sure to set up the connection to my data lake. So here in the admin settings under Azure Connections, I have set tenant level storage preview to allow me to connect to an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage account. I need to also grant workspace level storage permissions to the admin account as well. And here you see that I've allowed workspace admins to connect to their own storage account. Now let's take a look at that account within Azure. Let's take a look at the data within Storage Explorer. Here we can see the contents of my data in the data lake. My data is here in the curated section. And here are my CSV files that I'm using within Power BI. Let's take a look at how this data set can be viewed within Azure Synapse Analytics. Now, if we go into Synapse, we see, of course, that I have a primary data lake account that I created when I created my Synapse Workspace. If I want to add a new resource, I can just click on this button to add a new resource. And I have the option of connecting to a SQL database or external data. And the external data would allow me to connect to an existing Azure Data Lake storage account. I've already done this. And here is the result. Here is my Power BI file that we looked at, and here is my curated data. So I can look at the data from within here if I wish to. And since I didn't put the header information, that's not going to show up in this particular view. I will need to fix this query to do that, but it'll give you an idea of the ability to look at the data. And then I also have the ability within my Develop section here to go to Power BI and look at my data sets here. And my data sets can include my Data Lake Connect, but they also include other elements that I have within SQL, so I can choose to combine them that way as well. If I can take a look here at my existing reports, again, I see a report that I created connecting to my data in the data lake. So I have the full ability to do anything I want to from within here, as if I was in Power BI, but I'm within Azure Synapse. So during this session, we talked about the 4 different kinds of pools that exist within Azure Synapse. We have the built-in, or more commonly called serverless pool, the dedicated pool, which contains your data warehousing components, the Spark pools, which are used in the creating of your machine learning or other ETL components. Lastly, we have integration pools, which can be used for tasks to integrate it using an interface that is almost exactly like Azure Data Factory, as it contains the same code. We talked about where to create a data warehouse within the dedicated pools and how the different kinds of pools worked. We also looked at several applications which integrate within Azure Synapse Analytics, including, of course, Power BI, but we also briefly touched on Azure Devops, as well as Cosmos DB. Unfortunately, there just isn't enough time to go through all the different things that we could possibly do in Azure Synapse, but I really hope you found this a good introductory section to the kinds of things that you can do within Azure Synapse. I want to thank you very much for attending the Cloud Marathon, and I hope that you are able to take a look at some other sessions. If you'd like to get a hold of me regarding any questions in Azure Synapse, please contact me on Twitter at Desert Isle SQL, and we also have a YouTube channel and a Twitter account at Cloud Lunch and Learn. Thank you very much for your time.